My next guest, Graham Winter, knows Billabong's sad tale as an all too familiar one. His book, First Be Nimble, warning that in the current volatile business world, companies that fail to adapt and innovate are at risk of becoming extinct. Well, for more now on the importance of corporate agility, Graham Winter joining me from our Adelaide studio. A warm welcome to you. Accept a level of heat from stakeholders. Just one piece of advice in this telling book. Easier said than done, Graham, at the coalface.
Oh, absolutely, Carson. However, and I think your previous guest just highlighted it, the keys in organisations these days are to make the tough calls around where you can actually invest your resources. And at any given time, if you're running a company, you've got stakeholders who've got conflicting needs, budgets, customers, the community, and so on. You've got to balance those out, and at various times you're going to move more in one direction than the other. And that really does require senior leaders and then those who are involved in executing the strategy to, as we say, accept a bit of squirm in order to get that benefit as you move forward. Absolutely,
and Richard Rumelt's also stating in that previous interview, quote, give a person some power and discretion to choose. Is that happening enough inside corporate Australia?
No, absolutely not. If you ask what's one of the fundamental challenges in organisations, I think they're too busy. They're too busy trying to execute their current business plans, and the senior leaders particularly are not spending enough time looking over the horizon. I'd argue, and obviously we can talk about that a little more, I'd argue that's a capability issue around management and middle management and how they hand over power. And I think it really is a message now, be brave, not busy.
How can you be brave, Graham, when you haven't, as Richard was saying, and I'll dispense with quoting from him from here on in, but when you don't have a culture of leaders who've, quote-unquote, been through the fire, when they haven't been burnt, how can they really know what it's like?
Look, I think there's a variety of things. The first one is to just make sure that every team leader, and I'm a firm believer that the critical issue around creating adaptive organisations is that you've got to find out where's the practical benefit going to come from. And the big challenge for most organisations is they're organised around what I call experts in silos. So you've got scientists, you've got engineers, you've got accountants and so on. But the critical issue is how do you actually punch the holes in those silos so you can get them to connect and move quickly. And once people get used to working together, innovating, understanding a bigger picture than their own individual silo, it's not as difficult as you see. And there are plenty of examples of organisations that do get through that. And yet, sure, it requires tough leadership. I think it requires some decisions. It requires some harder deadlines. But once you involve your people in understanding that context and they get to start working with people with different mindsets and beliefs than just the people in their own silo, you get a much better result.
Just give me a bit of a plotted summary of McRae's Fine Chocolates. This forms, of course, the basis of your book and a workout strategy from a new owner when the chips were down, as it were. Getting everyone on board or telling them to get out of the way, that was almost hurdle one, but it was arguably the most important one.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we find as we're working with organisations and they're trying to develop this capability to adapt is to firstly get people to understand the difference between change and transition. And by that I simply mean, organisations are facing lots of disruption, and that disruption's translating into change, like changes in technologies, changes in distribution channels and products and competition and so on. But it's not that change that's the issue. The change that's the issue is the transition. So this is an ability to say, how do we let go of the things that hold us in place? Things like the need for control, the need for status, the need for recognition. So one of the keys I find is, an absolute key, is to develop a core skill in organisations for collaborative problem solving. And once you start to get people together working on problems and start reducing the hierarchical decision-making way, people start to open up their minds and they start to see different ways and different approaches, and they actually start to innovate their way out of difficulties rather than trying to manage their way through them.
And yet the very hierarchy of a board, by definition, who have scaled the dizzy heights of junior management to get to that level, sometimes, as you point out in the book, there are those that find themselves in a role where arguably they've been brought in too soon. They haven't really spent long enough in the trenches. How difficult is it to engineer that skill set that's only half-baked, as it were?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a chap called McCall who wrote a book called High Flyers a few years ago and studied who were the best general managers. And not surprisingly, the answer was those who have got the best general management experience. So I'd come back again and say, I think if there's one single blocker to getting leaders to expand their thinking, it's this experts in silos model that just prevails across our businesses. And yet, if you're going to be adaptive, you're going to have to be brilliant at partnering with people inside your business and outside your business. And it does take the skill of a leader to be able to share some power. And it's the difference between having really good disciplines and good measures versus tight controls and this need to sort of enforce your own status, which is a really old style.
Speaking of sharing power and old styles and all of that, the accepted view on deferring and at least tapping the wisdom of a former leader, in this case, and as you use as your example in the book, going back in time to the former CEO and saying, why were some of the things that worked before a buyout suddenly dispensed with? How do you balance that? I mean, the struggle to prove your own mettle in the role of leadership, but also having the humility to go back and say, I can learn something from my predecessor.
Yeah, as you say, look, it is a humility, but some of my background, as you probably know, is in the sports psychology area. And I had the opportunity to sort of move out of the corporate area and work with the Australian Olympic team for a period of time. And one of the core skills when you're working with something like an Olympic team is the ability to debrief, which essentially means, how do you continually embed this process of fast learning and fast adaptation? And you see it in special military, you see it in startup businesses, you see it in those that are nimble and adaptive. So I'd argue that it's a skill that is about being able to debrief. It's being able to say, what worked well and what didn't work well. What can we learn from that and how do we improve it? And basically, when you look at Australian business, we find that one of the skills that people really open their eyes when you just train them simply in how to actually debrief and learn from your experiences rather than feel that you need to be right and have to know the answer. You won't know the answer in an ambiguous and adaptive environment. You need to know the questions, but you won't know the answers.
Well, will you know them also in the relative heat of the moment still? So the debrief process, how to judge when that occurs? Because so much of one's personal ambition is still bound up, arguably, in the role, even when it's been handed to someone else, that in order to dispassionately cast your eye back on in time, it's fraught with difficulty.
Well, it is, but I think if you look at, I mean, certainly in terms of researching the book and looking at Australian and international organisations, there were 4 or 5 things that they did that really separated out the adaptive businesses. So they were able to co-create, they were able to flex, they were able to learn on the run, and each of those had that ability to let go of something. So to co-create, you're going to need to let go of your own sense of control. If you're going to flex, you're going to need to let go of this sense of having a lot of structure. If you're going to learn and adapt, you're going to need to let go of being right all the time. And to me, these are things to infuse into the performance system, to infuse into leadership development. It's a really highly practical thing, that it's the way organisations treat their conversations day in, day out. And the way we talk about it is 3 conversations: align, collaborate, debrief. And if you think about that, that's what you're doing in any sport, you're doing it in any business context, but it's the ability to speed up that cycle. So you're aligning, you're collaborating, you're debriefing fast, and you're doing it around projects, you're doing it around leadership issues, you're doing it around your numbers, you're doing it around all of those elements.
Can you credibly align, step 1, when those that are in the leadership positions of influence and decision making can't really relate to the very market they're purporting to be, I suppose, embracing? Let's just take Billabong as an example. Many would say, a la Fairfax, you need a Gen Yer on board to understand social media, to understand hip fashion, not someone of a kind of a baby boomer mould.
Oh, I totally agree. Now, that doesn't mean that you necessarily need them on your leadership team. What you need is a leadership team that's skilled enough to be able to bring in those people into their debates, bring them into their collaborative problem solving.
But there's a pride thing at stake there, isn't there? There is pride at stake, and you flag it in the book, where you had the perception of a dot-com bubble guru who was coming in and teaching, the bricks and mortar brigade how to suck eggs. It didn't go down well. How did he break through that briefly?
Oh, look, I mean, he broke through it by simply picking some things inside the business and saying we're not going to do those anymore. And one of them in particular, which, it's a bit of it's radical, but it's taking away a profitable product and saying, okay, we're going to introduce a replacement product in the next 12 months, and we're going to do that by working across those silos, by connecting our technical experts. And that takes challenge. But if you put the capability, and that's what we're finding, is that when businesses develop the ability to align across their silos, when they have core skills around collaborative problem solving, and when they can debrief, they learn as they go. You don't do this in one big step. Yeah, but it's not surprising that the number one message that lies across the whole model in the First Be Nimble book is let go, welcome the squirm. It is not a comfortable experience, and you're right, and most of your questions are really, can senior leaders let go? I'd argue if they can't let go, their businesses can't adapt.
Graham, with that call to arms, that warning as well, I'll leave viewers to ponder that one. First Be Nimble, your offering, published by Wiley, and I do thank you indeed for your insights, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Carson.
All right. And that's our show. We'll see you in 7 days.